Welcome to the Art History Midterm Study Guide. All right, be sure you understand what tenebrism is, that extreme contrast in a realistic painting or photograph. Genre painting is painting of everyday scenes of life and everyday people, okay? Know that these basic sort of stylistic and thematic concepts between these major art movements. The Baroque was all about the ultimate moment, capturing that ultimate moment in a story, okay? For example, dramatic that way, vivid color, contrast, movement, lots of action, and that element of time is very important. That's an actual visual element, believe it or not, time. The Italian Renaissance was definitely, these people took on classical, Greco-Roman classical style, but they were very much interested in the ideal, which is also linked to humanism and that idea of ideal perfection of mankind, of humankind. Christian figures were often filled with the power of God, so that's why they seemed so overly musculature, or their parts of their bodies were out of proportion, like the hands in the David sculpture by Michelangelo, okay? So that's all part of the Italian Renaissance, the ideal, okay? The Northern Renaissance were also humanists, but their style of art was completely different. They are interested in telling the truth in their artwork, details, ugliness, and all. They're the inventors also, because they're interested in truth, in genre painting. No surprise there. Their work is very highly detailed, filled with a lot of symbolism that you don't see so much in the Italian Renaissance, okay? And so that's what really distinguishes them. The idea that they tell the truth about an event, even if it's a biblical event. The neoclassic period is all about civic duty and moral duty and social duty, and it's filled with moral themes, and it often looks very severe and sort of austere, which is why a lot of the paintings by Jacques-Louis David tend to look like a stage set because it's so stiff, okay? Also, they have the emergence of grand portraiture. Portraiture had already been started, but grand portraiture elevated the sitter into some sort of heroic status that was fulfilling his or her duty to the world, okay? So that's what grand portraiture is. Romanticism was, of course, in reaction to the neoclassic, and they were interested in feelings, high emotion. They celebrated actually the beauty of nature, which is really starting to make a big impact in the art world. They were interested in telling about social injustice in their work, as well as the exotic, like the foreign lands and things like that. And they often told tales in there, or represented stories in their paintings that were of somewhat horrific events for that feeling, that high emotion. Okay? Visions also became important, personal visions. This is Donatello's David. It's the first male nude of any kind since Roman sculpture. And he is actually post-battle here. He is standing in the contrapposto pose on the head of Goliath. He has been victorious. But in this particular instance, even though he's an ideal, he is really true to the fact that the David in the biblical story was sort of a preteen man, girl, a boy. He was a boy. All right. This is Andrea Mantegna's early Renaissance piece called The Lamentation over the Dead Christ. This was geared towards a Christian audience, And the foreshortening used, thrusting the stigmata, the wounds in the hands and the feet at the viewer, is meant to remind that Christian audience that Christ suffered real pain and suffering for you. And the monochromatic color use of brown makes him look very dead. And that's all supposed to reinforce that idea that he really suffered for Christians. The Arnolfini wedding. This is from the Northern Renaissance. And this is Jan van Eyck is the artist. This is sort of a painting of a marriage contract, okay? And it's filled with plenty of high detail. Look at the brocades and the fur lining and the hair on the dog and all the filigree on the candelabra. That is all hallmarks of the Northern Renaissance. But here we've got the symbolism, which is all throughout this painting. She's wearing green, which is a hope for motherhood. She also looks pregnant, which is another, of course, hope for motherhood in the future. She's wearing a head covering, which means they have been married, so this is just a reenactment, so to speak, so they can have a record of this, their marriage. The dog between their feet represents loyalty. The shoes off in the bedroom, I might add, the marital bed, means that they're on holy ground, and they are, because you see in the candelabra hanging above their head, only one candle is lit, and that's the presence of God. We see some fruit in the window and on the table. That's the sign of wealth and prosperity and fruitfulness. They're not hitting that message too hard, are they? And then, of course, on the back mirror, we have the 12 stations of the cross in the frame of the mirror, which is the steps that Christ took from the Garden of Gethsemane all the way to the crucifixion. Bruegel's landscape with the fall of Icarus. This is the Northern Renaissance. It's a genre scene, but it's got a Christian message. Here's the answer. The man in the red shirt, the red color contrasts against that analogous colored landscape, making him the focal point or the main subject of the painting, rather than Icarus, who is in the title. He's the title character, and he's the main subject of the title. We have about a quarter of the world portrayed here with this use of atmospheric perspective. And it looks like nobody, even we the viewer, can find or even looks up in Icarus's direction. The shepherd keeps tending his flock, the fisherman keeps fishing, and the boats sail away in a completely different direction. Nobody notices Icarus. And that's all to drive home the proverb, the Christian proverb of no plow stands still because a man dies. In other words, in the face of tragedy, life's going to keep going on. The world's going to keep turning. It's meant to teach humility and humbleness. The Eisenheim altarpiece. This is again Northern Renaissance. This altarpiece was sat behind an altar in a church, a chapel, in a hospital for people who suffered from skin diseases. And we look in the main scene here, the crucifixion. Christ looks tortured. He is dead. The skin is yellowing and is starting to peel away from his body. His arms look twisted and tortured. His fingers are splayed open wide. The figures are in anguish with their grief that surround him. We are actually got in the scene here. It's actually pictured in Mount Golgotha. We're actually in the Middle East, and it's dark in the painting in the crucifixion because supposedly, according to biblical stories, when Christ died, the moment he died, the sky went black. So that's why it's so dark. At the foot of the Christ, we have a little lamb holding a chalice and a cross. That is the Lamb of God, a symbol for it, because Christ is really the Lamb of God for Christians. Okay, he's the sacrificial lamb, but he's portrayed twice in a way, kind of, in this painting. When the parishioners from that hospital came during service, they were suffering from skin diseases, and they looked at this Christ and they saw that peeling skin and that rotting flesh, and they knew that he suffered real pain for them because they are experiencing it themselves. But they also know that he knows their pain. There's a sympathy, a sympathetic sort of symbiosis working there between the viewer, the parishioner, and the image here in the painting. Here's the supportive information. When you look at it compared to Raphael's crucifixion from the Italian Renaissance crucifixion is completely beautified. Christ looks down almost like he's asleep. Skin is healthy looking. He doesn't look emaciated or dead, even though there is blood spurting from his wounds, which the angels there are capturing. We have a very symmetrical, balanced composition here. The angels, with their lyric sort of floating fabrics and things, sort of decorate around the Christ as they stand tiptoe on those little clouds. And the people from below look up in sort of a peaceful, loving manner up at their Christ. And this is a beautiful landscape of basically Italy with its warm colors and its soft light. This is idealized. It's made to look beautiful. Because, well, I think the message here is that this is, for the Italians, a symbol of joy. That he has risen and that he has sacrificed for us, and this is a joyous message for Christians, as opposed to the anguish and pain and truth of the Eisenheim altarpiece depiction of the crucifixion. Oh, here we go. 3 Davids. We've got the early Renaissance Donatello David on the far left. In the middle, we've got the Michelangelo David from the High Renaissance from Italy. He's also in a contrapposto pose. Very well-muscled, developed young man. This is a man, though. This is not a youth anymore. He sports all the great classical Roman, Greco-Roman style with his perfectly symmetrical body, his aquiline Roman nose and features, his sort of physical beauty and perfection. But in this case, his hands are out of proportion to the rest of the body because he is getting ready for battle. He looks off over his shoulder, sizing Goliath up. Here we are right before the battle, and this is where he will eventually, this is where the power of God is in his hands. He will eventually use that slingshot to kill Goliath. That's why the hands are out of proportion. In the far right piece, we have Bernini's David from the Baroque period. Remember, the Baroque is all about that ultimate moment. So here we have him portrayed, not in contrapposto anymore. He's still fully muscled and looks strong and developed and everything, but he's in that action pose of that diagonal, the diagonal lines of the body, and he's getting ready to launch his rock towards Goliath as he got his face sort of concentrating, grimacing as he concentrates on it, focusing in on his enemy. That's the ultimate moment he's getting ready to spring forth. And that's the difference between these three. Here's another Bernini sculpture, Apollo and Daphne. Here, we're looking at the ultimate moment in time when Daphne is being transformed into a laurel tree to save her from the clutches of Apollo. You'll notice that the figures are running and everything is on the diagonal. the arms, the legs, the drapery, the hair, the fingers, everything is on the diagonal, which conveys movement in art and action. We see the texture of the tree starting to sprout leaves from her fingertips and hair, and the tree trunk texture around is starting to come up over the top of her lower torso, and her toes are beginning to sprout roots. He's capturing that ultimate dramatic moment in time when she's being transformed. We're watching it. Here's another piece from the Baroque from the north, actually, by Rubens, The Raising of the Cross. You'll notice everything practically in this painting is on the diagonal, even that rope that's helping hoist Christ into the ground. Almost all the figures are as they writhe around him. Of course, Christ himself and the cross are in a complete diagonal. And we've got strong contrast, or tenebrism actually, highlighting him, because he's, of course, the focal point in the painting. We're watching that ultimate moment when he is going to be lowered, boom, down into the ground and crucified. The neoclassic period, Jacques-Louis David, the Oath of the Horatii. This is where you see that idea of civic and social duty, sacrificing oneself for it. These are the three triplet brothers of Horatis that are pledging their lives to their father before they take up their swords to go off to fight and another threesome to settle a war between Rome and another province. The women are in anguish as they watch their husbands or husbands-to-be go off to battle. But you'll notice the strong lighting that highlights all the figures rather kind of dramatically, sort of garishly almost. And that enclosed sort of space, it seems very small. That's that sort of stage set quality that seems to come with a lot of this painter's work. And he is the biggest one in the neoclassic. There's no question. David is the most famous. Here is the painter's name is Sir Joshua Reynolds. This is a portrait of Lord Heathfield in the grand manner. He has just defended and has, won for the city of Gibraltar. And he's holding the keys, that symbol to the city, the keys to the city. He looks off with his shin raised off into the distance as sort of in heroic manner. The horizon line, you'll notice, is really close down to near the bottom of the painting. That's to make him look like he's even looming larger than life over the entire landscape, where he has just defeated his enemies. You can see the smoke rising behind him. And the strong lighting and contrast, of course, highlights him. Okay, but here is the idea. He's supposed to look noble, but he's also meant to look that he's actually doing a duty that he feels is owed to not only his country, but to all of the people that he's kind of reigning over or lording over, shall we say. Okay. The noblesse oblige is what that French term is. Noblesse oblige, that the monarchy is beholden to the people they're supposed to be governing. They have to have some of their best interest at heart. That's perfectly fitting with the neoclassic. And then, of course, the Romantic period, Goya. He is, at this time, court painter to the king and super close friends with King Carlos IV. You also hear him called Charles IV. This is his family, King Carlos and his family. And we've got the strong tenebrism on them. Their faces are highlighted. They're probably prettified as much as they could be, but they're in their finest regalia and all of their trappings and all of their symbols of state and lots of pattern and glorious textiles being displayed here. Shows them as a prosperous, wealthy king and country. Goya is even in the very background there on the left. That's how close he is to the king. Through a series of disasters, physical ailments, and the war with the French, Goya begins to transform his art, not stylistically, like we're going to see later on in the 20th century, but thematically. There's going to be lots of different series of prints skewering the hypocrisy of the rich and the wealthy, the complete inhumanity to man in war, like the disasters of war print you see from the series from that, with all the people being hacked up and just hung. But his attitude towards the monarchy changes considerably. He's actually even almost put in prison for a while for treason. They think he's been Cahootanizing or linked to the French government. Nonetheless, he paints a series of what was called black paintings. And this one here, Saturn devouring his children, is the most famous of that series. Saturn, of course, is King Charles IV, the King of Spain. And who are the children? This is actually from an ancient Greek myth where one of the titans, pre-gods, actually did eat his children. That's a real truthful kind of a myth. Anyway, Saturn is the king. So who are the children? Well, the subjects, of course. He's devouring them, gobbling up in them, this kind of crazed eyes, bulging manner, in his greedy way, sacrificing them to war and poverty and disease, and he just doesn't care. And that's the message. We've got the strong contrast highlighting Saturn, of course, here, as he gobbles greedily up, starting putting the head off of this poor soul. But that's the symbology there. Remember, the Romantic period is all about feeling and talking about social issues, emotion. Okay, that's all part of it. And here's the supportive information and biographical information about Goya, okay, which you will probably want to know. Goya is considered to be one of the last of what we call old master painters, and he's also considered to be the first modern artist as well. His career spans both worlds, and that's why he's sort of like Giotto in a way. He's a linchpin artist. That's it. Good luck.